Hi Facebook world. I hope I am the right way up. It's just told me to turn my phone around. So it's Vicky Moodwood here, and I am live with how the diet that saves the planet is going to help, and my opinion on it, my take on it, but also some information about the food industry that perhaps is going to help you to understand why you may struggle with controlling the food that you take in, the food that you crave, and just what seems to be going on with your health, and maybe why you're not getting the results that you want. If you are looking to feel happier, fitter, healthier, and lose a little bit of weight, this just might answer some questions for you. So if you joined me via the Eventbrite link, you will have been given a link to download the follow-along workbook. If you haven't got that workbook, don't worry, you can still follow along with what I'm saying, and I'll put the link under this live for you to download at a later date. If you want to be quite honest, you can just follow along without it. So what I had done was I posted last week when it was announced on the news just what the actual Save the Planet diet looked like, and just asked people, what did they think about it and would they like to know a little bit more about it. And so what I've kind of gone through is what the gist of it is, and basically what the powers that be that are saying, and it's EAT-Lancets that have gotten together with scientists to really look at how on earth are we going to sustain what's going to be 10 billion people that are living on the planet by the time we get to 2050. We are ever expanding population, folks, globally, and a lot of the world is starving, while a lot of the world is obese. And so trying to work out how to feed all of these people, plus take into account how to look after the planet so it's sustainable for generations to come, and also to work out how we can prevent the crazy diseases that seem to be appearing. And I know the term epidemic's been used when it comes to diabetes. And what I'm going to share with you about the food industry will perhaps open your eyes as to why it's something that we actually can control and have a part in if we understood what was going on in the first place. So basically, the diet that saves the planet is looking to lower the amount of greenhouse gases that are being emitted, and their argument is that there are more greenhouse gases being produced by animals and livestock than by plants. Now that's a whole debate on its own, so I'm not going to get into that, but basically what I'm looking at is from a nutrition and from a health point of view, what does it look like and is it helpful? So they've given you the guidelines of what they recommend people take in on a daily basis. And so they've laid out things like 50 grams of nuts, 75 grams of pulses or legumes. And so it goes on in grams per day. They've covered eggs, they've covered dairy, they've covered things like chicken, fish. And then separately at the end, they've mentioned how much sugar and how much they've allowed for oil. So what I did was got on my little app and just worked out what that was in terms of calories and in terms of the macronutrients. So for those of you who don't know, your macronutrients are your fats, your proteins, and your carbohydrates. And those are kind of the main three things that we use to create fuel and energy, that helps our bodies to just do everything that they need to do, and hopefully helps us to feel vibrant and alive and raring to go. So we have got so many diets around that are telling us to change the ratios of those macronutrients. So I'm sure you've heard of a low-fat diet. And so that looks at your fat intake being lower than your protein and your carbohydrate intake. And then you might have heard of a high-protein diet where you have more protein but less fat and carbohydrate than you would on the others. You may have heard of a ketogenic diet, which follows the formula of having high fat, medium protein, and very, very low carbohydrate. So there are all kinds of different ratios and protocols. Bodybuilders will follow a specific protocol when they're in their competition season, and then they'll change it, for example, when they are in their training season and building up. The same with athletes, and ideally we should follow a similar protocol and change up our macronutrients and our ratios depending, as women, where we are in our menstrual cycle and what we are actually physically doing, how active are we. So what this diet looks like is not unlike the diet that they follow in Asian countries, in that there is a lot of fat, which is good, which is not the same as Asian countries, by the way, but there's a lot of carbohydrates and there is a medium to small amount of protein. Now, from a percentage point of view, if you like numbers, it works out to be 19% protein, it works out to be 36% fat, and it works out to be 36% carbs, and it works out to be 45% fat. So it kind of is following more of that ketogenic type higher fat protocol. But before you all panic, if you're from the 80s generation and are still of that thought process that fats are bad and fats make you fat, what they are recommending are the fats that come from mainly fish sources and nuts and vegetables. And yeah, there is some fat in your pulses, your vegetables, and there's quite a lot of fat in nuts. We're also looking at things like good oils, so olive oil, coconut oil, that sort of thing. And altogether, it makes for a reasonably healthy diet. So do I think it's a good way to go? On the whole, I do. What it is saying is that it is going to be more sustainable for us as a planet. It's also going to help when it comes to things like how much acreage, how much land we need to produce all of this food for all of these people. And I get it. However, what we do know is that a lot of people have issues with certain grains, with certain pulses, and with certain vegetables and nuts. And we also know that not every person can follow the same diet. It just doesn't work. From an energy point of view, from a feeling good point of view, from your body being able to actually digest and break down those foods. And one of the things that stands out for me is that this particular way of eating is going to mean that there is a lot of phytates flying around, which are antioxidants that naturally occur in whole grains, in legumes, in nuts and in seeds. And they can sometimes bind to some of the major mineral sources that women in particular seem to be low in, and that's zinc, iron and magnesium. So if we're eating a lot of those foods, it potentially could mean that we need to look at perhaps supplementing with vitamins. So that's something that is to be aware of. The other thing that is kind of a bit of a concern for me is that a lot of the crops and the amount of crops that we're going to need to feed all of these people means that there's going to be more genetically modified ones around. And the issue that I have with those is that as soon as we get hybrid type of crops, then their actual content of their proteins and how they actually work inside us as human beings is changed slightly. And this is why we get a lot of people at the moment, and particularly over the last few years, who seem to be having issues with wheat products, with whole grain products, because it's not necessarily that they're intolerant to gluten as we used to know it, or gluten sensitive, but there are lots of proteins that make up the whole kind of term gluten, if you like. It's not just one thing. There's a lot of amino acids that create proteins, and gluten is protein that is in these things that we can have a sensitivity to. Now, it might just be one out of almost 60 that are now being found in various different types of wheat and grains and GMO crops. And so we don't actually know what is in what we're going to be eating, what we're going to be buying. So that's kind of my biggest issue. However, even bigger than that issue is the fact that they're recommending that you have 31 grams of sugar per person per day. Now, we know as health professionals, and I'm hoping that you guys have now kind of got the message through as well, that it's not fat and it's not cholesterol. Hi Daniela. It's not fat and it's not cholesterol that is creating the problem with heart disease. It's too much sugar. And to recommend that 31 grams per person per day is okay, in my mind, is a little bit ridiculous, because we do know, hi Karen, you've made it. I hope you got home all right. So what we do know is that the American Heart Association recommends 25 grams. Now the British is a little bit more than that. So in terms of teaspoons, that's 6 teaspoons. And the UK equivalent of the American Heart Association says 7 teaspoons. Now either which way, sugar causes inflammation at a cellular level. And we know that it's inflammation that, no worries darling, we know that it's inflammation that causes issues within the arteries, that causes things like heart attacks. We also know, and everybody I think knows, that there's a link between blood sugar and type 2 diabetes, and we're aware that we've been told for the last few years there's a diabetic epidemic going on. What not everybody may know is that there is a massive link to Alzheimer's with sugar, and that's why Alzheimer's now is being kind of mentioned, or being referred to, if you like, as type 3 diabetes. So the fact that they are saying that 31 grams of sugar is okay, in my mind, is really not cool. So on the whole, what do I think about it? I get why they are saying what they are saying, because without a doubt, looking at all of the information that we now know about diet, about how the body works, it would appear that everything is pointing to higher fat being better, but lower sugar also being better, and less animal protein, more vegetables, more fruits. I absolutely stand by that 100%. I think it's great. But as I said, we need to look at what we are going to do when it comes to GMO crops and that kind of thing. How can we solve it? Well, this is the issue. There is no one way of solving it. In the past, we all grew our own, and we knew what was in the soil, and we knew exactly what we had growing and when, and we ate seasonally. But when we're talking about billions of people, not millions, but billions of people, we just can't do that. So there is no one answer. And I think that this is the best that they can come up with that is sustainable and doable. The other thing I like about it is that they are trying to roll this out over a long period of time, and they are looking at doing it globally. So if you go onto the EAT-Lancet website, you can find out that they have actually got briefs all there ready to go for everyone, for people in the healthcare world, for people who are chefs and in the food world, for people who are in education. And they are recommending things like really going back to cooking from scratch, which is, you know, how my grandma used to be, and definitely my great grandma. Because the processed foods and the stuff that is available to us nowadays, thanks to the food industry, wasn't available then. They're also recommending that we don't waste food. We've got a massive issue. As I said earlier on, we've got kind of a separation in the world where we've got countries that have not got enough food, and then we've got other countries that are actually throwing food away, and there is a surplus being produced. It's bonkers when you think about it. But that is the way that it is. And so what they're recommending is that we try and have as much food reused, have leftovers for lunch the next day, make soups, make casseroles, use up what is left, don't throw it in the bin. And again, I wholeheartedly agree with that. They're also advocating that people eat together at meal times, that people spend time communicating and actually preparing food and cooking together. Now, if you've listened to the stuff that I did on hormones, you'll know that that makes complete sense. We start digesting before we even sit down at the table. When the brain is ready to sit down for a meal, it should already have got the message through to the stomach, hey, there's food coming, you're going to be in a relaxed state of mind, you're going to be ready to digest. The message comes that to the stomach and to the liver and to the gallbladder to start preparing and getting ready to bring in those gastric juices. And that's part of the preparing the food. It's part of laying the table. It's part of sitting down together at the table before the meal's served. And a lot of us just don't do that anymore. And that's why when we're eating on the go and we're eating under stress, we get all sorts of problems. We eat too quickly, we don't chew well enough, and we're not even in a calm state to be able to digest what we're eating, because we've never given our cells a chance to get into that state. And it's a nervous system thing. You may have heard of the parasympathetic nervous system, and that's what we need to bring in to allow us to de-stress and to be able to digest. So do I wholeheartedly agree with what they are suggesting we try and do? Absolutely. And they're also recommending that you buy from local farmers and you buy from reputable producers. Again, can't fault that. And the whole idea of consuming less farmed animals, to me, just does make sense. The only issue then, of course, and it's kind of the biggest if, is if people adhere to it. Potentially it will work on paper, and these guys are scientists and they will look at statistics, and they've also brought in nutritionalists and farmers, and everybody's got together. It's not just some people sat up in an office and thought this is a good idea. They have really thought about it long and hard, but, and it's the biggest but, how do we get people to actually adhere to this and do this? And this is the biggest problem, because who likes being told what to eat by somebody else? Nobody does. And let's face it, there's already so much confusion around food as it is. So a lot of people are just going to go, oh, just another thing we're supposed to be doing. How do we know what's right? How do we know what's wrong? And so often, if we don't feel convinced, what do? We don't do anything different. And I think that is going to be the biggest issue, unless they do really manage to do what they're setting out to do, and that's get all of the countries on board with this. And to be quite honest, if it works, fabulous, but there's going to be a massive shake-up in the food industry. So, and this is what I'm moving on to now. So what I promised you was letting you into why you're being duped by the food industry, and really in a nutshell, it's because there are things in our food, and our food is now being served to us in a way that makes it so much harder for us to stop eating when we're full and to not crave, because of what is in the foods that we are now eating, to make them taste better, to make them more palatable, and to give them that I can't put this down until I've finished it factor. And that's what the food industry want, because it's going to make you buy more. You buy more, they make more profit. Simple as that. Now, they make profits based on the foods that we buy continuously and regularly over time. So think about it. What you may or may not know is that the obesity kind of issue began back in the 80s and 90s, specifically more in the 90s, when the guy called Ansel Keys, he looked at these 7 countries and said, right, I have decided that our biggest health issue is too much fat, particularly saturated fat. He omitted all the rest of the countries where that wasn't the case, and because of various reasons within the agricultural world and the government and money, basically, they all said, yeah, that's a good idea, let's push crops more and let's tell people not to eat this stuff because it works in our interests. It didn't work from our obesity, from our Alzheimer's, from a diabetic point of view, but we didn't know that until about 30 years later, when that message had got through loud and clear that fat was bad and we should all be going low fat and eating more carbohydrates. And this is why we are fatter and more unhealthier than we've ever been before. And one of the reasons for that is that in the 90s, late 90s, the obesity BMI level was dropped. Now, some of you who are not sort of my age might not even know that it has been any different than being 25 as being healthy. But actually, it used to be 27. 27 was the healthy BMI. And back in the late 90s, they dropped it down to 25. Now, there's various reasons behind that, but when they did, the food manufacturers saw a massive opportunity to make money on those people who were suddenly finding themselves in the obese category, whereas before they were in the normal weight weight category. So suddenly you've got a whole ton more of people who have decided they need to lose weight. And you've got this message coming through loud and clear that fat is bad. So the food industry do this, and they go, all right, this is when Weight Watchers really kind of took off, when Slimming World took off, when, I've forgotten her name now, the lady who did the exercise and the dieting thing as a package together. They all brought out their own products. All of the supermarkets went bonkers on low-fat versions of everything. And basically what we didn't know was that there was low fat, and there were rules about what amount of fat was allowed to be in a low fat product, and it's 3 grams of fat per 100 grams of product. You can class your product as low fat if it's 3 grams or less in 100 grams. However, reduced fat and lower fat, it's only 25% reduction, and you can still call the product reduced fat and lower fat. And us as consumers didn't really realise that there was a big difference between low fat and lower fat. And so we were buying these products thinking that they were super low calorie as well as being low fat, because in our heads we equated low fat with low calorie, because we knew that fat contained more calories than carbohydrate, and that was really homed into us. So we knew that. We knew that carbohydrate and protein was 4 calories a gram, and we knew that fat was 9. So yeah, fat is the demon, it's the devil. And that was what the food industry went to town of, and that's when it really, really boomed. And the message got through loud and clear and really well for a very long time. Low-fat diets were everywhere. The thing is, whilst this is going on, and suddenly we've got all these people on diets and yo-yoing and calorie counting and still struggling with cravings and wondering why as soon as they come off a diet, they put it back on again. Because when they take the fat out of foods, hi Monica, when they take the fat out of foods, think about it, fat gives foods flavour, gives foods texture. So when you remove the thing that gives it that really nice mouth feel, the thing that gives it the flavour, you got to put something else in there. And so you then got food scientists who are working their socks off to work out what can we replace this fat with. And what they found was the 2 S's worked very nicely. What are the 2 S's? Sugar and salt. And so we obviously then added in things like flavour enhancers, and they played around with more herbs and stuff like that, which was quite good. But ultimately, our portions over the years got bigger, and the more fat that was reduced, the more salt and the more sugar was put into those products. And when we're thinking about these things, I'm not just thinking about ready meals. I'm thinking about things like biscuits and cake and bread and hi darling and hi Monica. I'm thinking about all of those things. So we've now got sugar in things that you would not expect sugar to be in, because it's often used as a flavour enhancer, and it helps with shelf life as well. So things like pre-sliced meats are going to have sugar in them when you look at the back. Now, what most of you don't know is that there's 61 different names for sugar in the food industry. So what we used to be taught years back was that anything ending in OSE, O-S-E, for example, glucose, sucrose, was sugar. Now, there's so many other terms that mean sugar. So things like dextrin, maltodextrin, cane sugar syrups, invert, that kind of thing. All not necessarily words that you're going to associate with sugar are sugar. And so we have got an industry that over time has been changing very slowly our portion sizes and also the amount of sugar and salt we're eating. And that means that we have literally gotten fatter and bigger. So as an example, I'll give an example of a Sainsbury's shepherd's pie. So a Sainsbury's shepherd's pie used to be 300 grams for a single serving portion, and that had 318 calories in it. It had 12 grams of fat, 2.4 grams of sugar, and 1.2 grams of salt. Fast forward to now, and that same serving is now 450 grams. So that's 150 grams extra, still classed as a single serving. And it's now got 404 calories. So that's not quite 100 calories extra. It's got 5.5 grams of sugar, so that's double the amount. And it's got 2.34 grams of salt extra, so that's more than double the amount. And it's also got 14.5 grams of fat, so more fat too. The point is that's right across the board, because their argument, the food industry's argument being, people seem to be wanting bigger portions because they get used to being served portions from takeaways. And here's the thing, and this is where, when I talk about the food industry, I don't just mean supermarkets, but I mean things like restaurants and takeaways and so forth. We've got, in this country in particular, a thing about more being more valuable. And we don't tend to focus on quality, unfortunately, so much in this country, but we focus on quantity. So if something is what we class as expensive, but we get a ton of it, we think we've got a good deal, right? Which actually is bonkers thinking, because if it's made from really, really good quality, but you get a smaller portion, that's so much better for your body and the environment all around. But we don't seem to make that connection. However, when it comes to things like takeaways, if you get classic, the most popular takeaways in this country are Chinese and Indian, and those portions are meant to be shared. Now, I know that a lot of my clients eat one portion to themselves. And actually, if you look at a serving size of rice that comes in a takeaway container, if you just get rice on its own, there's 3 portions at least in that takeaway serving, not just 2. So we are over-serving ourselves in a gigantic way. And supply and demand, supermarkets have cottoned onto that, and so they give you more food, which means that we think those bigger portions are what we should be eating. The crazy part of this is that back in the 90s, as a whole, as a nation, we were a lot more active than we are now. There wasn't Netflix, there wasn't everybody sitting on the computers watching YouTube, we weren't all sat on Facebook. We were out and about doing stuff, being physically more active, so we were eating less food, smaller portions, being more active. And then suddenly we got told that this figure for BMI now has dropped. Suddenly more of you are overweight, and by the way, what you need to do is follow this low-fat diet plan. What we're going to do is shove in a ton of sugar, a ton of salt, tell you to eat more carbohydrates, and over time, guess what? You're going to be more and more sedentary, and you're going to be eating more and more food. So is it a surprise that we are in this era now where we've got diabetes as an issue, where we've got more chronic disease like cancers, etc., as an issue? And we're kind of talking about it like it's a surprise, and it's so not a surprise. The biggest problem that I have as being somebody who's in the health and wellness world is that most of us don't even know that when we're getting things that we think are healthier versions. So for example, there's a lot of my clients think that gluten-free packaged food is better because gluten's not good for them, even though actually it might not be gluten that's the issue, it might just be the wheat itself. But anything that's something that's naturally occurring in it removed, it's gone through some kind of process. Therefore, it's a processed food. And the same thing with taking gluten out of something that gluten naturally belongs to is like taking fat out of something that fat naturally belongs to. You need to replace it with something, because it's going to change how that food tastes, how it feels in the mouth, how it behaves. So it gets replaced with all sorts of things like more salt, like more sugar, etc., etc. So is gluten-free better for you? Usually no. It's got more things in it that could potentially cause you a problem than any good it's going to do. So are you better off just avoiding the grains that contain gluten? Yes, it's much simpler. Same goes for things like caffeine-free, unless it's been made caffeine-free in a very specific cold water process, then the stuff that you buy, like a Nescafe or any other well-known brand of coffee, that's the decaf version, it's just processed. So you're actually potentially taking in more toxins and stuff and that's doing more damage than the actual caffeine would in the first place. But the food industry are going to tell you that because you as the consumer are saying that that's what you want, and they are just providing it for you. Here's the thing when it comes to women. Well, not women, actually anybody. A lot of the products that we are now eating, whether it's foods that are pre-packaged into ready meals, which I know a lot of you guys don't eat, but if you're getting, for example, packages of chicken breasts or a joint of meat or whatever, then those are going to be farmed en masse, which means that in their feed they're going to be fed on grains and they're going to be fed on antibiotics. Now, antibiotics are fed to cattle for two reasons, not just to kill any disease or illnesses that may be lurking there, but because antibiotics make them fatter faster. And that means that they grow bigger faster and they can get shipped off to the slaughterhouse quicker. And it's as simple as that. Now, take on board what I just said then. Antibiotics make animals fatter, which means that antibiotics in humans also make us fatter because they change what is going on in our gut microbiome. Now, what we eat and take in and digest and absorb is going to filter through into us. So if the products that we have been fed antibiotics, then even though the process is supposed to be that they're weaned off them for a specific period of time before they go to slaughter, so there should be nothing left in the meat itself, it's going to be in the fat, because that's where a lot of the toxins and the stuff that our body gets rid of, shunt stuff, if it needs to, that's into the fat cells where it kind of gets locked in. And this is the issue, going back to what I was talking about with the diet to save the planet. If we're going to be eating more grains and more nuts and more legumes and more vegetables and fruits, which, yes, brilliant, then that means that we're also going to be taking on board more POPs. Now, what are POPs? POPs are persistent organic pollutants, and those are the things that can create all sorts of issues for a lot of people. Particularly if you've tried everything when it comes to diet, you've checked out it's not your hormones, etc., etc. It can often be your toxic burden or the toxic overload, and we all have one in our system that is causing the problem, because those toxins get locked in the fat cells, and that means that they are going to prevent us from losing what's going on. It makes sense, because if toxins are locked away in our fat cells, they're saving them from doing any harm within our system. So it's kind of where we want them to be, really. But the more toxins that we take in, then it makes sense that your body wants to protect itself, and so it's going to create more fat cells to store those toxins in. So if we're eating foods that are more calories than we need, that are full of salt and sugar, which naturally hit our reward system, particularly when we're stressed, we're going to go for those foods. So we're going to eat more of them, we're going to crave more of them. That creates the bacterial growth in the microbiome that tells us we want more of them. And if we're eating more of them, we're going to be getting in more of those toxins. Our toxic load is going to be higher, so the body's going to hang on to the fat. You can see where this is going. So as a nation, we are getting fatter all of the time. So what can we do about it? That is the biggest question. Well, it's not all doom and gloom. Hurrah! Because what is happening is that the food industry are getting wise to this. Now, the big boys, the giants, and when I say the giants and the big boys, I'm talking about your mega companies like Nestle and like Kellogg's and like Unilever that own all of those brand names. They are ultimately about jumping on whatever bandwagon is going, really. Whether that's the healthy bandwagon or not, they're going to use it to their advantage any which way they possibly can. But what it does mean is that as consumers, we are also getting wiser to toxic overload, what is actually going on, what our animals are being fed, what antibiotics do to us as humans, and we know that we need to avoid them now because they are screwing up our own gut microbiome and making it more likely that we get illnesses and digestive issues. So we're all getting more clued up on this stuff, which means that a lot of the supermarkets are doing their best to help us. And it's going to start with the small people first and not the big people. So supermarket chains are a very good place to help you to kind of be a bit more of a discerning shopper, because a lot of them are now using organic produce, and they have specific organic produce, and they're going to tell you where it's from. A lot of them are also making sure that they tell you if things like palm oil are from sustainable areas, because for those of you who don't know, the palm oil production is like devastating the rainforest. And so you can actually now go onto websites, Marks and Spencer's have it, Aldi's have it, they're quite up on this stuff. And you can actually look at who are the farmers, how do they bring up the livestock, what is actually going on with them. So you can actually check out, and they're very open with who their suppliers are, which as consumers is great because you can really do your research. And ultimately there are going to be people who will never take on board this stuff and will always want to go for the cheapest version no matter where it's come from and what it's got in it. But in my experience, those are also the people who expect the GP to fix them and think that their health is not their own responsibility. I know you guys who are on here are not those people. You understand that if you pay a little bit more for organic, then it's going to be doing your body some good. And here's the thing, if we follow the guidelines for eating more fresh fruits, more vegetables, more pulses, more legumes, more nuts, and less animal food, overall, if you do buy organic grass-fed meat, then it's not going to really cost you a great deal more because you're going to be eating so much less of it. And to me, that makes complete sense. So what I'm going to just finish off on doing is just asking you guys if you've got any questions that you'd like to ask about what you might have noticed about the food industry. I'm sure you've all noticed that takeaway portions are massive and that we do think that that is the norm. I mean, let's take, for example, McDonald's, their kids' meal, that is their Happy Meal, right? That was a McDonald's, full stop. That was the size of it for everybody. That's what it was. And now, of course, we've got this, bigger size for an adult, and then you can go larger and blah, blah, blah. And all of the chains have followed that. So we now think that that is normal. We've got food 24/7. Everywhere you turn, food is available. And we are being sold to because we've still got this belief that we need to snack between meals to keep us going. And at the end of the day, if you want to be able to control the amount of food you are eating, how your body is functioning and able to digest it, you need to give it time between feeds to actually be able to do that. You need to switch on that parasympathetic nervous system where you prepare food, you get your brain and your mind ready to sit and eat slowly. Enjoy conversation, not with your head in your phone or watching a film, and actually allow your body to function how it's meant to function. Just those little things will help you to get in touch with your hunger and full up signals a little bit more. What I was going to say about the food industry, which I forgot, although it is in my notes for those of you who haven't downloaded the PDF, I'll put a link. In fact, I'll put it in this group page, and you can download it yourself if you want to, and maybe print it out and have a little read through it. But the food industry knows what your bliss point is. And some of you might have heard me talking about this before, some of you won't. But they actually have food scientists on board whose job it is to find the bliss point of specific foods. And that bliss point is the point where you have to keep on eating it. And it's an absolute science. And this is why when I have people coming to me and saying, you know, I can't just have one. When I open the packet, I've got to eat the whole thing. And they think it's to do with willpower. It's so not. It's to do with chemistry. It's to do with chemistry because those scientists have done their job really, really well. And that product has got just the right amount of sweet and salty and sour and all of those things that hit your taste buds, just the right amount for you to have to keep on going. And your willpower can try its damnedest, but you're not going to stop because that physiological and chemical process is much more powerful than your willpower. You then feel guilty about it, which then creates stress response. And for those of you who've been with me for a while, you know that a stress response is going to push you towards those sugar and salty foods. So the supermarket's win-win. If you're trying to treat yourself and to feel good, you're going to go for something that is high sugar. If you're trying to de-stress, you're going to go for high sugar, high carb, high salt, or all three. So either which way, you are going to go to pick up their products and get what you're looking for. And guess what? If it works, you keep going back for more. Those of you who now have been following me for a while will also know that the foods that we eat on a daily basis will determine the bacteria that is in our microbiome. So the more sweet foods, carbohydrate, high sugar foods we eat, the more of those bacteria we're going to be producing. And if you find that over time, it seems that you need more and more and more of those same foods, it's because the bacteria is doing what bacteria does, and it's increasing and it's flourishing and it's growing. That's what it does. And the only way to stop that is to give your body a break from those foods. And the quickest way and the easiest way, leave gaps between meals, or better still, go for intermittent fasting or 24-hour fasting. Gluten-free products, they are replacing gluten with sugar. Yeah. What harm from salt? Okay, so it's the salt that upsets your sodium and potassium balance, and that then is going to cause things like water retention. It upsets your whole mineral balance, and it will often lead people to needing to drink more to try and rebalance, or misinterpreting thirst for hunger. Also, from a cellular point of view, if your sodium potassium balance is out, it affects your metabolism. So table salt, or the salt that's used in manufacturing, is the wrong kind of salt for our bodies. We do need salt, and we need a little bit of that kind of table salt, but really we want salt that is more naturally occurring, like rock salt, sea salt, Himalayan salt, that kind of thing. And also, salt plays on your taste buds, so it's going to want you to eat more of a specific food. Does that answer your question, Monica? Hopefully it does. Anybody else got any questions? Hey, Avi, how are you doing, huh? Nice to see you on here. Nope, okie dokie. So I think that is it. Cool, excellent. I'm going to put the link to this little worksheet / PDF that kind of has written down everything that I've said. So if you didn't come in from the start, you can pick that up and have a little read. And I just want to say thank you for watching. Be a savvy consumer. Think about what is actually valuable, your health or the amount of food on your plate. Have a great night.